Welcome back to Viewpoint. Tonight we're talking to the Governor, Sir David Steele, who's been in post for about 5 weeks. We're discussing defence, external affairs, and also, in part two, the Royal Gibraltar Police. Sir David Steele, you've talked about your priority being to be forward-looking. What does that mean for you?
Jonathan, you're absolutely right. In my swearing-in speech, I made it absolutely clear that I wanted to be forward-looking. Gibraltar has hundreds and hundreds of years of history, particularly alongside the United Kingdom, but otherwise even beyond that. And we bank that. And I said in my speech that Gibraltar is a place that honours its past, lives its present, and looks forward to an ambitious and inclusive future. And that's where I want to set my store, on that ambitious and inclusive future. So I wish to use my role as Governor with all the influence that is allowed to me under the Constitution and by dint of being Her Majesty's representative here, to be able to help both the economy of Gibraltar and also the wider population of Gibraltar. Gibraltar, like the United Kingdom, like so many other countries around the world, has suffered immensely under this pandemic. Only last night I was talking to the general manager of the Rock Hotel, and the difficulties he had to face, while still keeping people employed, the difficulties he has had to face over the last 5 months with the lack of tourism. Others have said the same to me. I walked down Main Street and I talked to the shopkeepers. Gibraltar used to see 170 cruise ships enter in every year. The likelihood was we're going to get a fraction of that this year. Every cruise ship guest spends around about £35 each in Main Street. So there is going to be some difficulty, and I want to use whatever influence I have as Governor and presence to be able to help draw in more tourism, to help promote Gibraltar's economy, to reach out to the world and show what Gibraltar can do in its economic context. On the other side of that is the hundreds and hundreds of charities that operate in Gibraltar who similarly have been affected by the COVID lockdown. They've not been able to fundraise. They've not been able to reach out to those in distress because of the social distancing. Well, now that the lockdown is lifting, it's perhaps time for me, from this very, very privileged role, to be able to reach out to them and to garner support for them that's been so lacking over the last 4 or 5 months. So in being forward-looking, I'm looking at 2 planes really. The economy, especially after COVID, but also all the different communities and charities that exist in Gibraltar for the benefit of the people of Gibraltar. And if I can be a small part in helping them regain their strength after this period of 5 months and into the future, then that would give me a great privilege and pleasure.
You're the first Gibraltar Governor that I'm aware of to take office unmarried. And in the past we've seen the Governor's wife play a very prominent role in that charitable work. So I suppose the question is, do you feel that, looking at the way that the Governor has done his job, or previous governors have done their job, that you're going to have to do things differently, that you're going to have to do more yourself?
I think it's a very appropriate question. I feel I was honoured to be asked to take on the role, and I did raise it. Did they recognise that I would be a singleton in Gibraltar for much of the time? And what I was so impressed with was the very fact that Her Majesty's government, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, didn't see any issue with it. As Second Sea Lord, I was the first Second Sea Lord not to have a partner in supporting me every day of the week in that role. So I approach it, and I don't mind saying this publicly, I approach it with a little bit of nervousness, because I understand that in the past the governor's wife, the governor's partner, has played such a significant role in that, in particular in the charitable work, but in reaching out. All I can say, Jonathan, is that I've just got to work harder. And I hope the people of Gibraltar will forgive me for just being on my own and myself. All I can do is do the job to the best of my ability, and I'm not going to turn down any roles that frequently in the past were bequeathed to the governor's wife. And in fact, only yesterday I accepted a role to be the patron of the Girl Guides Association of Gibraltar, I'll just have to do it differently. And so I hope the people of Gibraltar will forgive me being on my own, but I will not let that stop me working hard to do everything that I need to do as part of this wonderful role of governor.
I certainly didn't suggest or want my question to suggest that any forgiveness was required, just that it was different. Let me ask you about a different sort of phrase that we hear in connection with your office, which is that of Commander-in-Chief. What does that mean?
Really, it's very much part of the governor's role anyway, to be the head of the armed forces, the titular head of the armed forces in Gibraltar. And if you went back 300 and odd years, every governor here has been the commander-in-chief of the armed forces here in Gibraltar, except one. During 1942, Eisenhower was here for 2 days, and he assumed command of the forces in Gibraltar. But apart from that, the governor has always been commander-in-chief. And so, in being appointed by Her Majesty the Queen to be governor here, I also have a remit from the Chief of the Defence Staff, in particular, to have full command of the Gibraltar Regiment. And I met the Gibraltar Regiment in my first week here. My goodness, how proud I am of that symbol of Gibraltar. The efficiency of the regiment, tested in operations, and now resident permanently in Gibraltar, I think is something to be incredibly proud of here in Gibraltar. And in a way, I also look over the Navy and the RAF here as well. I'm not slow to recognise that it's 5 years since I left the Royal Navy in retirement, so some of the language has changed, and I'm having to catch up quickly. But I was immensely proud of my 36 years in the Royal Navy. I'm immensely proud of the people who serve in the armed forces of the United Kingdom, which includes Gibraltar. And as Commander-in-Chief, my role, I think, is to promote their welfare, to understand their concerns, and to ensure, as part of my very real responsibility as Governor of Gibraltar, that part which is defence, which is one of those reserved matters that the United Kingdom takes very, very seriously, is to ensure that the defence of Gibraltar, with the people that are serving here in uniform, is always paramount. They say that the defence of a nation or a territory is the government's principal responsibility. And in adopting this title, Commander-in-Chief, I see that as my principal responsibility, to ensure that the security and integrity of Gibraltar is never undermined.
Of course, the Spanish incursions are a thorn in many a side in Gibraltar. Barely a week into your time as Governor of Gibraltar, I think we saw the Spanish Navy come through British Gibraltar waters and pull away HMS Scimitar and Sabre, if I'm not mistaken, certainly one of them, from a Royal Navy exercise. What do you make of that dynamic, which for a lot of Gibraltarians, or which for a lot of people in Gibraltar is quite tedious and annoying, but the convent has a very clear line on what incursions are and what they are not?
Tedious, annoying and frustrating, I'd probably say. But it's what the Spanish are doing is a challenge to sovereignty. It's not a threat to sovereignty. It's a political point. And all I would say is that whenever this happens, the Convent and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, on every account, protest to Spain. The fact is, it's been going on a very, very long time, and the Spanish are trying to make a point. But we have to obviously understand that under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, ships can make rights of innocent passage through our territorial waters. So in many cases, some of these so-called incursions are actually just the Spanish vessels employing their international right to transit through the British Gibraltar territorial waters. There are some that are deeply frustrating, and we had one this last weekend where a survey vessel was quite clearly not conducting innocent passage. And the Foreign Office and the Chief Minister both made protests to Spain, which were received and understood, and will continue to protest in the strongest possible terms. But they are a challenge to sovereignty, they're not a threat to sovereignty, and we will live with them. And I'll finish by saying this on this matter, Jonathan. I take my hat off to the Gibraltar Squadron, the Royal Navy Gibraltar Squadron. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, they are out there maintaining that presence, whatever the incursion might be. And on my first weekend, I was just round at Catalan Bay, standing overlooking the water, and I saw a Royal Navy rib shadowing a Spanish Guardia Civil vessel going through British Gibraltar territorial waters. It was really professionally done, not antagonising, not getting in its way, but just making it absolutely clear that these are British Gibraltar territorial waters and not other people's territorial waters. And I think that the sheer presence of the Royal Navy Gibraltar Squadron, as I say, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, whatever the weathers, they are out there maintaining the integrity of our waters, I think is commendable. And I think that in assessing the incursions, one also has to look at how we respond to them. And I think we respond to them in a very measured, very diplomatic, but very, very proper way in the current circumstances.
Very British.
Yes, very British. Absolutely. We're not going to antagonise. We will do it in a way that maintains our presence, as we do around the world, whether it be in the Far East or here. We will maintain what we believe to be right.
I'll ask you about the Gibraltar Squadron in just one moment, but on the matter of incursions, what would you say to anyone who, frustrated by them, thinks that perhaps not enough has been done to stop them or to counter them or to protest them?
Well, on the last point, the protests are very, very strong, and both the Convent, the Foreign Commonwealth Office in London and the Government of Gibraltar are as one in making those protests known. I think that what we're doing at the moment, given the current wider political, economic and of course the COVID circumstances, is absolutely the measured response that is required. It doesn't need anything more, Jonathan. It needs to be emphatic, and it needs to have a presence. If the Royal Gibraltar Squadron was not going out on a day-to-day basis, I would be concerned. But as I said, they're out there every time that there is even the slightest hint that there's going to be an incursion. The Gibraltar Squadron is out there maintaining our presence and the integrity of our waters. And the very fact they're there is making a statement that we will not accept the incursions that we see.
The replacement vessels for the Gibraltar Squadron are older and slower than Scimitar and Sabre. What should we read anything into this?
Well, I would. They are slightly older, but they've had superb modifications over the last few years. New engines, new air conditioning, new navigational aids. They're a far better vessel than the older vessels. They're slightly larger. They are slightly slower, but they're much better seakeepers. I was talking to some of the coxswains yesterday about the difference, and they did have nervousness about these new ships coming down, but now the coxswains and the crews of the of the Gibraltar Squadron are so thrilled to have the P2000s, simply because they are larger, they can ride the sea better, they can go out in conditions that the two smaller vessels couldn't go out in before, they have much better facilities on board, and because they are higher, they get a much better view. And remember, they are only a stopgap. The two smaller vessels had come to their end of their working life, and they may be withdrawn to the United Kingdom, and I think they're going to be used as inshore patrol vessels in Portsmouth to look after our aircraft carriers, one option for what they're going to be used for. The P2000s have come out here as an interim stopgap before in 2020, the last part of 2021, early part of 2022, we get two brand new Royal Navy vessels that are designed specifically to do the work that is necessary in Gibraltar, and they will be completely state-of-the-art, and I believe they'll be delivered either at the last few months of 2021 or the first few months of 2022. And I really do think that that shows the Royal Navy's commitment and Defence's commitment. The very fact the United Kingdom government is putting so much money into two very high-tech bespoke boats, ships that will serve Gibraltar for the next 25-30 years, is a clear indication of the United Kingdom's commitment to the defence of Gibraltar.
If I can ask you about law enforcement, if I can take you back again to the ceremonial swearing in. The leader of the opposition suggested that the convent had issued a bland statement on the retirement of the former Commissioner of Police. And he suggested that that raised questions. Now, we've had a little bit more said in public since, but I don't think anything by the convent other than to confirm the appointment of Richard Alger as the Commissioner until April 2022. So, two questions if I may. The first, are there still questions pending about the circumstances surrounding the retirement of Ian McGrail? And I know that this, it was something of a baptism of fire for you in that you came as this was already unfolding. But answer it as you can, if you would, please. The second question is why the appointment of Richard Alger until April 2022 and then an open recruitment? Why is that the process?
Yes, very sensitive issues, but allow me to answer it in this way. Commissioner McGrail dedicated an amazing amount of time and commitment to the Royal Gibraltar Police, and he is to be applauded on and commended on what he delivered for the police force here in Gibraltar. All of us in uniform know that at some time one has to get off the train and let somebody else get on the train and drive that train going forward, and I'm afraid it's a natural consequence of uniformed life. And I commend Commissioner McGrail for actually recognising that the time had probably come for somebody else to take over the reins, and hence his decision to retire in the way he did. It gave the opportunity for the Gibraltar Police Authority to look at the future of the police force in Gibraltar and to see how it was to be managed in the future. And after a few weeks of deliberation, the Gibraltar Police Authority came to me with a recommendation for how the force was to be managed in the future. And the Chief Minister and I talked very, very closely and long time about it, and we both agreed that the recommendation from the Police Authority to appoint Richard Alger to be the new Commissioner was the right one, and for him to take forward the recommendations of the Inspectorate of Constabulary's report, taking it forward into the future, was going to be exactly the right way ahead, with some assistance so that Richard, the Commissioner, can concentrate much of his time on the operational delivery of the police force while having somebody else to help him understand how to implement the change that the police authority and the Chief Minister and I think is probably right to take the Royal Gibraltar Police Force into the next decade or so going forward. Policing is changing all the time. In the United Kingdom, the method of policing is changing, and the Royal Gibraltar Police Force has to change as well. So I think we have in Richard Olger exactly the man to take it forward for the next 2 years, up until April 2021, and maybe thereafter. And there, at the end of that time, we'll have an open competition with a bias towards somebody who is Gibraltarian, taking the police force forward with all the knowledge that they come with from a very difficult policing arrangement here in Gibraltar. It's often overlooked, the fact this isn't just a typical police force. This is a police force that has to deal with so much more than one constabulary in a county in England might have to deal with. It's on the water, it's on the border, it's on the airport, it has so many functions. It is a really difficult policing operation, and I take my hat off to the officers of the Royal Gibraltar Police for all that they do so well, and I'm pretty convinced that going forward Richard Olger, supported by his senior officers and the Federation, who have shown great support to Richard over the last month or so, I believe that the Gibraltar Police Force can shine in a way that it perhaps hasn't done in the past.
And of the fact that he'll serve as Commissioner until 2022, and then there'll be an open, competitive recruitment process then. For anyone who thinks that's a little strange, what would you say, given that he'll be incumbent in the role for a number of years at the point at 2022 when it'll then become open again?
Well, the simple answer to that, Jonathan, is that that date was the end date of Commissioner McGrail's term of office. Had he not decided to resign and retire, that was the end of his term. So the Gibraltar Police Authority, the Chief Minister and I thought, in which case we'll make it up to 2022, and then we'll have an open competition with the prospect that Richard will compete. I hope he will for that role, bring his vast experience to the role, and create his own mandate going forward beyond 2022.
And finally, Your Excellency, we're conducting this interview in a building steeped in history, which you now get to call home. How are you settling in?
I still can't find my way around properly. I still get lost. I'm dropping breadcrumbs everywhere just to get myself back to where I have to go to. It's lovely, Jonathan, it's lovely. And being right in the centre of Gibraltar, being able to walk out into Main Street, I'm getting to know so many shopkeepers who are being so kind, and I think it's a real privilege to be here in Gibraltar, and it's a privilege that I want to honour by returning my commitment to Gibraltar over the next 4 years that I'm allowed to be here. I do believe it's a considerable honour to be the Governor of Gibraltar, and I look forward to getting to know as many people in Gibraltar as I possibly can.
Your Excellency, Sir David Steele, many thanks for your time.
No, Jonathan, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to Sir David Steele, Gibraltar's new Governor, for welcoming us into his new residence here at the convent and answering a broad set of questions, giving us an insight into his aspirations for the job as Governor of Gibraltar. That's where we leave Viewpoint this week, but we'll be back at the same time in 7 days' time. Thanks a lot for watching, and good night.